Right. Okay, Chris. Back to this point about who do you work for and the size of the company. It crossed my mind that we did have another guest here who is a micro business, I suppose you'd call it. Was one man. He's a personal trainer and he works in it's somebody else's gym, in fact. So it's not even his own premises. Does health and safety apply to him in some way? Would you be able to advise and help a person like that?
Yes, I could. Health and safety law in this country applies to both employers, employees, and the self-employed. So the gentleman you're talking about is someone who's self-employed.
Yeah.
When employers, be they sole traders or limited companies, share premises, they're expected to cooperate with one another. And employers have a duty not only to their employees, but also third parties who are affected by their work activities. So a personal trainer has a duty to their clients, for example, as does anyone who operates a gym, for example.
Yes, I can understand the gym operator. That's obvious. You've got to make sure things don't fall down, the machines don't break. I suppose then that applies if we have people listening, and I suspect we do, who are consultants. They're sitting at home workers. We've already mentioned those. They're sitting at home. They may have people visit them at home for a discussion, a client. Health and safety is also of relevance to them.
Yes, certainly in theory, although I suspect in practice the duty would be relatively low if all they're doing is sitting in a lounge room or an office, drinking a cup of coffee and having a discussion. The risks and hazards which both parties are going to face as part of that are very minimal. However, for example, a self-employed carpenter on a building site would be completely different.
And who would you be working for there? Would you work for the self-employed carpenter and give him advice, or would you really be working for the building contractor to give them advice?
I could work for both, but
ideally both. Two voices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ordinarily, I would be working for the contractor, although there could be cases when I would be working for the self-employed person.
So what exactly do you do? Again, if nobody's employed you, if the listeners out there have not yet employed a health and safety consultant, give us an idea of your kind of average day, Chris, when you're working for a customer.
Well, I think the big thing I'll do is try and assist my clients to be aware of what the safety hazards that they face as part of their daily business, as it were. And once they understand them, we can then jointly decide how they can best be controlled, if they need to be. And that will quite often involve assisting them writing documents. If an employer has more than 5 employees in this country, there is a duty to have some documentation in place.
Documentation
about safety. There's a requirement for a policy. There's a requirement for risk assessments and method statements.
Documents which are designed for employees, visitors, everybody else to read. It's instructions, is it?
And to show that the business has considered the risks and hazards which they face, how they then choose to communicate that on to those who need to know is a different issue.
Right.
Quite often it's done in writing and hard copy. It may be electronic this day and age. It may be on a face-to-face basis. It just depends upon the circumstances, really.
What's the often mentioned risk assessment that we hear so much about as being a huge burden? Mark's smirking there because, somebody was a school teacher was telling me that school trips under threat.
Nightmare, yeah.
It was you.
No, it wasn't me, but I'm aware that, it's a school trip. There are schools that don't do trips anymore because the risk assessment, never mind the risk, was just too much.
An administrative burden.
The Health and Safety Executive has written on that, and I think they would disagree with you on that point. That's one of the myths about health and safety, I'd have to say.
Really?
Yes. But to get back to your point about the term risk assessment, much maligned, often misused, and it means many different things to many different people. The finance industry will use the term risk assessment. The health and safety industry will use the term risk assessment, and everyone in between. From a safety perspective, the idea is that an employer will endeavour to establish the hazards which employees and others are faced as a result of their work activities, and then assess the risks that people are faced as a consequence of those particular hazards. Most things in life are a potential hazard. However, the likelihood of them doing harm varies enormously, and in many cases is very, very low.
Right, so you don't have to assess all risk, because there is a risk attached to getting out of bed. There's a risk attached to staying in bed.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So I suggest you do neither. Far safer.
End it all now.
Yeah, stay half on the edge. Yeah, but there's a risk associated with that.
And maybe we should ask you about the business, Chris. What kind of people you work for, and so on, and what the focus of your business is.
Well, my business is focused on helping SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises, manage and control and understand the safety-related issues that they face in their daily working lives, hopefully in a manner which allows them to improve the way in which that business functions, such that it'll give them some form of commercial advantage and allow the business to succeed and grow and prosper.
Okay, that I find interesting, because most people perceive, or perhaps uneducated people like me, perceive health and safety as something that gets in the way, but you're saying it can help improve and give a competitive advantage. How does that work?
Yes, I think if it's done properly, it will. Health and safety is a small part of employee welfare. Now, the size of that part will be dependent upon the nature of the business, whether or not it's a high-risk business or a not-so-high-risk business. Clearly, health and safety is not a particularly large issue for an office-based organisation. It is in manufacturing, engineering, construction, oil and gas, things along those lines. But it is still part of that welfare issue. And, funnily enough, the best people always work for the best businesses. So it is very much in an employer's interest to try and attract and retain the best people he possibly can.
Interesting.
So you'd actually, you'd be suggesting that if you pay attention to health and safety, it's not, let's call it an avoidance mode, avoid getting sued, make sure these things are in place so things don't go wrong. It is also, or maybe even more importantly, a positive benefit to the company that's going to help you promote yourselves to the workforce, to our workforce out there.
Yes, I think so. It's a small part of it. It's not a major part, but it is a small part of a larger pie.
Yeah.
And I guess the larger part is not getting sued all the time.
Yes, well, that's health and safety as it's traditionally seen.
It's an avoidance, isn't it?
It's an avoidance. It's about a fear of failure, which may never happen. So that tends to be quite transitory in its effect as to whether or not is a good motivator for an employee or employees, employer or employees for that matter.
You mentioned it previously something about the different industries. Is this relevant? And we asked you on the show because we were looking for someone to represent positively health and safety, because I think it's got a bad reputation. I think it worries quite a few people in business. And I wondered what kind of businesses you work for as a consultant. You mentioned construction, the oil industry, those sort of people. Who do you work for?
Perhaps the easiest way I can explain that is by saying who I won't work for. In other words, industries I know I have no expertise in. I have no expertise in rail, aviation, nuclear or process chemistry. Now, I'm likely to be able to assist most other organisations, be they in the public or private sector.
Right.
However, until I know the nature of the brief, I can't give you an accurate answer to that. But I would certainly consider a brief from most other industries.
Right. Regardless, regardless of size of company, the size of it's got nothing to do with it.
Look, I tend
did
to
say
help. Yeah,
MSMEs.
I tend to help smaller businesses rather than larger ones, not for any particular reason, but it's normally just logistically easier for me to do so as a effectively a freelancer or a one-man business.